Against the impossible, what if I told you that in the heat of the desert, beneath a burning sun, a handful of men defied the odds so completely that their story sounds more like legend than history? 800 Vikings, 800 warriors from the cold seas of the north, scarred by storms and shaped by endless war. And before them 40,000 Saracens, an army so vast it could drown the horizon in dust, an army so certain of victory that it mocked the very idea of resistance. The world should remember this story, but it has nearly been forgotten. For on that battlefield, courage, discipline, and belief crushed numbers, and the fate of kingdoms trembled on the edge of a sword. The stage of history. The year is 1064. Europe and the Middle East are worlds colliding. Empires stretch their hands across oceans and deserts. Faith fuels armies, and whispers of holy war already haunt the air. From the icy fjords of Norway, King Magnus Barefoot has led his warriors south, driven by both destiny and devotion. The Vikings were once raiders of coasts and pillagers, but here, in the shadow of Jerusalem, they came with a different fire in their hearts. No longer were they merely sea kings, they were crusaders in spirit, convinced that they fought for God as much as for glory. Their numbers were small, lonely 800 strong, but they were men forged in hardship. Each carried the discipline of shield walls honed in centuries of battle. Each bore the fierce pride of a people who believed death was not an end, but an honor. To them, fear was an enemy already defeated. Across the desert plain rose the camp of the Saracens' 40,000 soldiers under the command of Abu Nasr. The size alone was terrifying, a sea of tents, banners whipping in the wind, cavalry horses pawing at the sand. To any rational mind, this was not a battle, it was a suicide. But Magnus Barefoot did not march his men here to die. He marched them here to etch their names into eternity. The morning sun rose, blinding in its brilliance. Dust rose from the Saracen cavalry as they formed for the charge. The earth itself seemed to shudder beneath the weight of their numbers. And yet, in the center of that storm, 800 men locked their shields, planted their feet, and stared into the coming tide. The impossible odds, the desert, trembled with the thunder of hooves. Across the plain, 40,000 Saracens prepared for war cavalry, glittering with curved blades. Infantry stretching into the horizon, banners whipping crimson against the sky. Against them stood the Vikings, 800 warriors in simple steel, faces weathered by wind and salt, their long beards stiffened with sweat beneath the blazing sun. Every soldier knew the odds, 50 against 1. By every measure of logic, they were already dead, yet no man broke. Because, in the heart of their king, Magnus Barefoot. There was no space for surrender. Magnus raised his sword. His voice, deep and commanding, cut through the roar of the enemy like thunder. We are not here to count their numbers. We are here to test our courage. The shield circles. Magnus divided his army into 8 circles, each a fortress of shields. The Vikings interlocked their wooden bulwarks with iron rims, forming living walls. Spears bristled outward like the teeth of wolves, while archers crouched inside, ready to strike. These were not just formations, they were vows, oaths of brotherhood. To hold the line was to live. To falter was to betray not just themselves, but the gods they served. The Saracens charged, thousands of horses pounding across the sand, their riders shrieking war cries. From the distance, it must have looked like a tidal wave about to crush a handful of stones. But when that wave struck, it broke. Steel clashed. Spears pierced through horses' chests. The front ranks of cavalry collapsed in chaos, their momentum shattered on Viking shields. Sand erupted into clouds of dust as animals screamed and men were thrown from saddles. The Norse roared with fury, shoving back the tide. Fire in the night. When the sun set, the Saracens regrouped. They still had overwhelming numbers, and they believed time was on their side. But the Vikings were not waiting to be slaughtered. Under the cloak of darkness, they unleashed something the enemy had not expected. Crude but terrifying fire weapons, flasks of burning pitch thrown into the ranks. Flames licked across the sand, igniting chaos. The Saracens shouted in confusion. Their horses panicked, their camps lit in a nightmare glow. Against this fiery curtain, the Vikings surged like demons out of the night. For the Saracens, this was no longer a battle. It was terror. The day after, when dawn came, the Saracens hurled themselves forward again, but each wave met the same result. The shield circles held, unbreakable. The more they pressed, the more they bled. The more they screamed, the more silence answered them from the Viking line grim, unyielding, inexorable. By the second day, whispers began to ripple through the Saracen host. How could 800 men resist 40,000? Was God against them? Was fate itself mocking their numbers? Fear began to eat away at certainty. The duel of kings, 2 days of blood and fire, had passed. Twice the Saracens had hurled their armies against the Viking shield circles, and twice they had broken upon them. But now the desert boiled with a new fury. From the heart of the Saracen camp, Abu Nasr, the commander of 40,000, prepared his final strike. His pride was wounded, his soldiers restless. How could a mere handful of northerners resist the tide of Islam's armies? To restore honor and crush defiance, he summoned his most loyal warriors, 2,000 of his personal guard. Men draped in black, their curved blades gleaming like fangs under the sun. Across the plain, Magnus Barefoot watched. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, did not waver. He knew this was the storm's eye, the moment where history would tilt. The charge of the guard, the ground shook as Abu Nasr's elite thundered forward. The desert sky filled with dust and war cries. Against them, Magnus raised his sword high, and the Vikings roared in unison. The two forces collided in an explosion of chaos shields, shattering, swords clashing, horses tumbling. But amid the maelstrom, one figure broke through. Abu Nasr himself, riding a white stallion, a towering presence above the clash, his eyes locked on Magnus. It was not just a battle anymore. It was a duel. Clash of titans. Magnus charged, his sword glinting with sunlight. Abu Nasr swung his scimitar, sparks flying as steel met steel. Around them, men clashed and died. But the circle of combat widened, as if fate itself demanded this showdown. The first blow staggered Magnus, but he gritted his teeth, shoving Abu Nasr back with the weight of his shield. The Saracen general struck again, blade slicing Magnus's shoulder, blood staining his armor. Yet the Viking king did not fall. Instead, he laughed, the deep, thunderous laugh of a man who had seen death too many times to fear it. Magnus raised his sword high and struck with all the fury of the north. His blade tore through armor, crashing down upon Abu Nasr. The Saracen general reeled, gasping, before collapsing from his horse into the dust. The collapse. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. The death of Abu Nasr shattered the spirit of 40,000. What no cavalry charge, no fire, no desperate assault could achieve, one moment had undone. The Saracen lines broke. Soldiers fled, their banners trampled, their horses scattering. Panic spread like wildfire across the desert. Magnus raised his sword once more, his voice booming across the plain. Forward, leave none standing. The Vikings surged, chasing their fleeing enemies. The hunters had become the hunted. The aftermath, the desert wind, carried the stench of blood and fire. For 3 days, the Vikings pursued the shattered Saracen host. What had begun as an impossible stand had turned into a relentless hunt. By the battle's end, more than 35,000 Saracens lay dead. Their banners were burned, their commanders slain, their mighty army reduced to dust, and the Vikings, barely 230, had fallen. A loss, yes, but compared to the ocean of bodies that covered the plain, it seemed like the gods themselves had shielded them. The survivors raised their swords to the sky, their voices roaring like thunder across the empty dunes. To them, this was not only victory, it was proof that faith and courage could bend the impossible. But this was more than a battle. It was a message. The news spread swiftly across Christendom that a small band of warriors had stood against an empire's might and triumphed. Kings and priests whispered of it in awe. Some called it divine intervention. Others called it madness turned to miracle. Whatever the truth, the story lit a spark that would soon ignite Europe. Within a generation, that spark became the Crusades wars that would shake the world for centuries. For the Saracens, it was humiliation. For the Vikings, it was glory. For Rome and Christendom, it was prophecy. The lesson of the 800, what does this story teach us? That numbers mean nothing when faith burns brighter. The Vikings who fought at Jerusalem did not vanish into legend. They became the hammer that struck the world awake. Their victory became part of the mythology that fueled kings, knights, and empires. And though their names may be forgotten, their defiance echoes still. 800 men, 800 shields against 40,000, and they did not break. If this tale of forgotten valor inspired you, don't let it vanish again. Like this video, share it with those who crave the hidden truths of history, and subscribe to Empire Unveiled Legends. Because here, legends are not just remembered, they are unveiled.